back. Another episode of Did You Know? If you haven't done so already, please make sure you like and subscribe. Tell somebody about the channel. My name is Conway Jr. Um, I'm trying to give information out to folks who may have been to prison, folks who are dealing with people who have gone to prison, and just trying to give some of the information to help me get through, right? And so I'm calling this series Did You Know? Did you know that most people who go to prison have not had any therapy? Like most people who have gone to prison have not, dealt with their instant offense in a therapeutic fashion. Me, for instance, I was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. I took a plea bargain. I was charged with first-degree murder. And so what that means is that I took someone's life. And the whole time, I was 21 years old. And by the time I went to prison, I was like 22. And then I spent 8 years in prison. So I get out when I'm 30. I get off parole when I'm 43. Right? So that's 20 years that I never dealt with the trauma. I never dealt with, as a matter of fact, I didn't really begin to openly talk about it until 2015. And so, I think there's an assumption that people in prison have access to therapy. I think there's an assumption that people, in prison have access to a counselor or access to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It just doesn't happen, right? And so what you're dealing with when you come home from prison, you're dealing with a traumatic situation that happened before you went to prison, particularly with women, right? With women, the trauma begins much earlier, much sooner than by the time they show up in jails, detention centers, and prisons. So that trauma is unaddressed. And then when you come home, you're immediately met with the inability to find employment, with the inability to find housing. Most likely, you're going to get into a toxic relationship. That's going to lead to you going back to what you know best, which is self-medicating, which was probably one of the reasons why you ended up going to prison in the first place. So it's a vicious cycle that kind of feeds on itself because there's no interruption, right? And so I think, as we began to talk about this reentry thing, as we began to look at folks coming home and thinking about, or at least for me, what could have happened for me was my parole officer realizing that I needed access to treatment, not just, drug treatment. I needed access to deal with the trauma. I needed access to deal with, how do I talk to people about having taken someone's life and not carry that as a burden, right? How do I reconcile myself back to my community, right? How can we, restorative justice was not a conversation that was happening in 2000, right? And I think parole officers, probation officers, county officials, government officials, as we talk about defunding and reinvesting, these are some of the things that I think should be part of that calculus. So did you know that most folks who have been incarcerated for any length of time have never had any type of therapeutic engagement in regards to trauma, that they've never had a session with a therapist? And did you know that most of them can't afford a therapist because they don't have health care? They don't have health care because they don't have employment. And you're going to say, well, they have access to Medicare. Most folks don't know that. You're going to say, well, they have access to, state-based health care. Most folks who have been to prison don't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that I had access to Medicare. I didn't know that I had access to state-based health care. So I think it's important for us to talk about that and, educate ourselves. So this is what this is about. Did you know? Hashtag did you know? I think I might start using that one. And smash the like button, tell somebody about it. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Peace.